Now, since we play the Sicilian, we need to know what to play after e4, c5, and if white doesn't play the c3 Sicilian, or if white doesn't play the open Sicilian. Now, if you play something like, for example, knight f3, then we can we know what to play after that. We go d6. But there's already second move deviations where you play something like d4, for example. If d4, c takes d4, popular gambit here is called the Smith-Morra attack. It's to play the move c3, and the idea is that if black takes on c3, then knight takes c3, and white will get some sort of attack with bishop to c4 and bishop to f4, with this f7 and c7 squares being weak. But luckily, we don't even need to learn this theory here because knight to f6 and then e5, this transposes into a c3 Sicilian after knight to d5. Does everyone see this?
Yeah.
So after knight to f3 and then knight to c6, we have a c3 Sicilian. On the other hand, there's another move that white can play. White can play b4, and this is called the flank gambit. This one, you know how you usually say gambits you're not supposed to take? This one, you don't really have a good way to not take it, though. For example, if you play like e6, then he can just take you, and if you take back, he plays d4, he gets a nice center. So I think the best move here is just simply actually just to take. This is actually not that fearful. A lot of time they'll play a3, and now you can play the move e6. If he plays d4, then just knight f6. And if he decides to play the move e5, you can put your knight on d5, which is good for you. If bishop to c4, then d6. And if he takes, then f4, knight c6. You're up a pawn here. So as long as your development is fine, then you're good. So knight f3, just bishop to g4. If castles, then we can take advantage of the pawn on d4, which is weak. The pawn on d4 is weak here, and we can pin it to the king with queen to b6. After king to h1, then we can win yet another pawn. Queen takes, or bishop takes, and queen takes d4. Black is up 2 pawns here. He has a nice position. Black, I think, should win this game. If simply white plays bishop to d3, then black can play his own sort of moves here. He can even go, for example, d5 later on, countering in the center. The other move that white can play here is knight to c3. This line is called the closed Sicilian. And the idea that I recommend here is to find a way to play d5 no matter what. So we first play e6 to support d5. And if he plays g3, we just go d5 immediately. It doesn't matter if he takes or doesn't take. If he doesn't take, say he plays d3, we can continue development. Knight to f6, bishop to g2, then just bishop to e7. If f4, just continue development normally. If e5, then knight to d7. And if knight to f3, castle, castle. And if rook to b8, then we can try to play b5 and b4 ourselves. If he tries to stop that with a4, then we can play a6. And now, it doesn't matter really what he plays. He can play bishop to d2, whatever, and then we can just go b5. In the closed Sicilian, if he does take us on d5, for example here, if he just takes on d5, then after e takes d5, we have no problem with our piece's development. This bishop, in fact, has the whole diagonal now to use. And if bishop to g2, then we can just defend the pawn with knight to f6, defending d5. If he goes knight to e2, then we can just play d4, gaining more central space, forcing the knight to move. If the knight comes to e4, we can trade it off. The bishop is misplaced on e4, so we can play just knight to d7. And after d3, knight f6, we win another tempo on that bishop because it has to go back to g2 to protect the light squares on the king side. And when it does do that, then we can play bishop to d6, develop our bishop, and then we can castle king side as well. The closed Sicilian is not something you need to be afraid, but you just need to play the moves e6 and d5 to get a hold in the center. Now, if white plays knight f3, like the normal open Sicilians, we will play the move d6. In this case, there are a couple of variations that white may be able to play. One of them is the move bishop to b5 check. If bishop to b5 check, then it's called the Moscow variation, and we just simply block the check with bishop to d7. Develop a piece, and stop the check. His bishop will trade with us, and after knight takes, we develop our knight as well. After castling, though, the idea is that after knight to f6, we will not have the opportunity to play our knight on c6 to control the d4 square. So his idea is to play, for example, rook to e1, and after you play e6, he'll go c3 to try to play the d4 and establish 2 pawns in the center. But after bishop to e7 and d4, black does not need to participate in white's plan. He can just castle. There's no need to take there. And if white tries to play knight e5 to try to get to your traded pawn, you just don't listen to him. just play knight to d5. Usually listening to your opponent isn't a good idea because then you do what he wants to do. If he plays the move c4, then you just come back to b6, attacking the c4 pawn yourself, actually. And if he takes on d6 now, then b takes. And if b3, then you can trade on d4, c takes, queen takes, and then just bishop c5, threatening the f2, putting pressure on f2, and we can bring our knight to f6 soon, with an open d file for us to use. Notice how at the end position there, white did not have a big center anyway. If white tries to play something like queen to e2, which is more subtle, then we can just go e6 the same way. If d3, there's nothing to worry about here. You can just play bishop e7. He might play knight to g5 to try to play f4 later on, but this also makes you gives you the option of h6, gaining another tempo. If his knight goes back to h3, then we can just castle. And black once again will plan to push his queenside pawns and put pieces behind them. So for example, if he plays f4, we can just go b5. And our idea is simply to play queen b6 later on, and either c4 or b4. We can also follow that up with a5, a4 if needed. Here, a lot of beginners might try something like bishop to c4, because they just play what they think they know in every opening. And bishop to c4 is also another line. The idea is that he's threatening all these light squares that are not really guarded. But after bishop c4, we just play knight to f6, our normal development. We're threatening the pawn on e4. And if white chooses to develop or to defend the pawn with the d3 move, then we can just play knight to c6. After knight to c6, castle. Then we just go e6. This is our usual development. We stop his bishop's attack on this diagonal. And after bishop to b3, then we can just go bishop to e7 and plan to castle ourselves. If he tries c3, we castle first. And d4 right now is not possible because this pawn will fall. So he needs to spend the move playing rook e1 first to defend that pawn. But by that time, we can already play b5 and get our attack on the queen side on the way. If he tries knight to d2 to stop the move c4 or anything like that in the future, we can develop our bishop to b7, where it supports the move d5 later on as well. If knight to f1, we can just play rook to c8. Black has a nice queenside structure and should have no problems attacking on the queen side here with b4 later on. Another variation here is called the checkover variation. The checkover variation goes after d4. This is an open Sicilian line, I guess, but after c takes, the idea is that black takes with the queen on d4. This line is not such a huge deal right now. I think the best move for black is to play a6. The whole idea is that if black plays knight to c6, then white plays bishop to b5, pinning the knight, and keeping his queen on d4 for right now. But if black plays a6, then he kind of distracts white from playing this. And if, for example, knight to c3, knight to c6, black can develop normally, play Chevanian classical, whatever you want to play. After, for example, queen to d1, then just knight to f6, followed by e6. This position is fine as well.